So I don't know how this is going to sound. I'm just going to make some shit up.
Right? Oh, no, you got to talk.
Yeah, I got to talk. I got to be like, and back in the studio, blah, 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 something.
Yeah, but the beauty is you can re-record it as many times as you want if you...
Yeah, I try not to do that. All right. So finally back in the studio with me today. If you remember from episode 11, Mr. Theran Peplow, welcome back. Good to have you.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I had fun last time. I figured might as well do this again.
Yeah.
There's been so many things that have happened. We recorded that show in April. I think it was March, April, something like that.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is my first show back after being on an airwave break for about 6 weeks, watching the country literally just kind of fall apart. As a patriot and a veteran, kind of difficult to watch. In the blog post last night, I talked about, kind of subtly talked about a sense of discipline as a warrior watching the battlefield develop and not just shooting back immediately. Early on, with the George Floyd protests and when Minneapolis was burning, I got on and I tried to engage, social media host, try to be part of conversation, and was immediately shut down. The country was not ready to have another white guy talk about the problems in the country. Very specifically reminded of my white privilege. Very specifically told that my opinion right now does not matter. That was difficult to swallow. And as I've talked with other veterans, in the last 2 months, watching everything that's been happening in the country, a common theme that I've seen with a lot of my brothers from my infantry battalions and cavalry squadrons and just my time in the service, in Russ, chatting with Russ up the street, watching what's happening to our country right now, being part of that 1% to 2% that's actually put our life on the line to protect the Constitution, to protect our society. It's created an anxiety and a depression that a lot of us weren't prepared to deal with. Instead of being pissed off about what's happening, it's really, it's had a very negative impact in just quite literally watching the country burn in certain cities. What's your take on that?
I think I'm in the same boat you are. I still think America is the best thing going in the world today, but part of me wants to let it burn and give all these people what they're asking for and defund the police and get rid of anybody who controls anything and just let the cities burn, because I know you and I will be all right. Our families will be all right.
Yeah.
The other patriots will be all right because my house isn't burning.
Right.
And I'm not going to let that happen.
Well, I do specifically want to have a discussion centered around the defund the police argument that's happening right now, but let's work up to that.
Yep.
In the last 5 to 6 weeks, as I've taken a break, stepped back, and just kind of watched things evolve, one of the things that I have done is I've tried to open my mind. I think anybody who says that they're objective all the time is just straight line to your face. Anybody who says that they don't have some construct of bias, they're just not honest with themselves, and therefore they're not honest with who they're having a discussion with. And immediately I was on the defensive, especially when I got told about my white privilege. I was sitting here,
I'm like, worked your ass off for your entire life.
My dad was an orphan.
Yeah.
I was on free lunch program in school. I got the education that I have by serving my country in the my service to the military. But in a lot of things that a lot of people, unless you know me really well, my dad was stationed in Georgia in junior high at Warner Robins, at Robins Air Force Base. And I went to Rumble Junior High School in Warner Robins, Georgia, where I was a minority. I remember being picked on specifically because I was a white kid. I remember being harassed, smacked, kind of punched, just walking down the hall, physically abused, because I was the new white kid.
Yep.
Cracker, blah, 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 blah. And I remember how that feels, right? So it was hard for me to swallow white privilege. And I'm still on the fence about it. I recognize, though, in doing some research and trying to look at things from a different lens, and I've got to thank there's people in my network, one specifically, Ed Stover, who's a West Point graduate. He was a West Point football player, really huge, big African-American dude. He's very intelligent. He's very intellectual. And some of the stuff that he posts on his social media pages prompts thought. So, not that anybody's ever had their mind changed because of Facebook, but I'll be honest, just because, let's face it, I'm here trying to manage a social media presence, right? So I've got to at least give it some credence. But Ed and a couple other people that I highly regard made me think about things or pointed me to some resources that kind of opened my thought a little bit. And I think there's something to it. I don't think it is the end all be all. You know, when I responded to a post about, you know, my dad being an orphan and all that I just said, somebody immediately said, well, you know, that's the most white privilege answer. White privilege isn't about socioeconomics, blah, 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 blah. But then in the very next rant of somebody attacking me without reading my previous response, they told me that I would never understand the socioeconomic challenges of some. And I was like, do you know, so that whole argument base loses its own. It's hard to take it serious when people don't even, they contradict themselves.
And don't know what they're talking about.
Don't know what they're talking about. But I've tried to be open-minded about some of the challenges. Just last weekend, I read, somebody forwarded me an article, and there was a video clip attached to it because there's video for everything nowadays. Mm-hmm. In Indiana, over Memorial Weekend, at some remote Indiana campground somewhere in the backwoods, Indiana, Hoosierville, there was a short video clip of a black gentleman with some of his white friends in the middle of some campground. In the theory, or what's not well defined in the video, but what is well defined in the article, is these three backwoods country motherfuckers that probably bang their cousin every night had captured this dude and they were attempting to lynch him. And so immediately I'm like, this is 2020.
And that, yeah.
That can't be true.
Yeah.
And I read a little further and I did a little bit more research, and in the surrounding counties, there's been, I think it was 2 to 3 unexplained lynchings in the last 60 days. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. This is happening. How is this happening in 2020? How do we have just blatant racial attacks where people are lynching people? And that story alone kind of made me open my eyes that there definitely is a racial problem in our country. And it's probably the worst it's ever been in my 47 years. And although that is obviously a story that doesn't favor the white race very well, my story growing up in Georgia, you know, there's racism on both sides.
Yeah. Yep.
And the racism doesn't need to be quelled in the white race only. It needs to be quelled across mankind. And as long as you have, let's take CHOP in Seattle. I think it was 2 weeks ago, it was reported that they segregated CHOP to a black only section.
Yeah. Racist.
Right.
Pure racism that they're fighting against.
Right. How many people died in the 40s, 50s, and 60s fighting desegregation? And you have what is, by all legal terms, an insurgency within our own country's borders. And one of the first two things they did is they built a wall and they armed it, which is kind of ironic because most of those people were fighting for open borders not too long ago, and the first fucking thing they do is
make their own,
make an armed border. And then one of the second things they do is they segregate. I mean, they went 80 years backwards in less than a week. And so it's difficult to take their chance for change serious.
Yep.
So what do you think?
No, I agree. I think I think racism goes on both sides, and it's never going to go away until you let it. Until you let it go away. Until you stop bringing it up. And
Morgan Freeman has a great interview. I think it was on CNN with Don Lemon, of all people. I'm glad he schooled this dude. It's a few years old, but it's classic because especially right now, it gets
always
replayed. But Morgan Freeman says, if you want racism to go away, stop talking about it.
Yep.
And although I don't think that's the end all be all solution, it's a start. It's a starting point.
Well, and there's things that affirmative action and things like that they're never going to let you be equal if you're constantly still pulling for a handicap.
Right.
If you're pulling for your affirmative action, you're immediately not putting yourself equal to anybody else.
Right.
So get rid of that. Be equal and let racism go away.
I think the laws today versus the laws in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and the major civil rights movement in our country, I think the laws are different today to where you wouldn't have the collateral impact. I know that, in the early 1900s, 20s, 30s, there were banking laws. I can't remember the name of them right now, but there were banking laws that red zoned what are now probably considered, the ghetto, low income, impoverished areas, to where they would deny loans. Or if they did give them a loan, it was a higher interest rate loan. Yeah. Right. And so those actions kept people in poverty. And I recognize that.
Yeah.
I see that. But those laws have been changed. It's now illegal to do that.
Yep.
And if it is happening, by all means, it should be reported, investigated, and no company would survive that nowadays. No. You can't have a baker make a cake or refuse to make a cake for a gay couple and lose their entire business, right? So you can't say that there's so many protections and just by evidence of what we're doing today. Social media, the social justice warriors, everybody who records everything and pushes it out to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. I don't think that type of open, blatant racism or the policies that would intentionally disadvantage somebody because of race would get along very far. I think it would be stopped pretty quick. Which kind of brings up, to the point a second ago, just it sounds easy, but stop talking about it, but stop making it an issue.
Yeah. Yep.
Because as long as we want it to be an issue, it'll continue to be an issue.
Yep.
And again, for those that watch, it's very easy to say this as two white guys sitting at a suburban table surrounded with lots of expensive toys.
Yeah.
So we've got racial tension at a height that our country hasn't seen in 50, 60 years. Let's talk about the defund the police.
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So for the watchers and listeners, if you haven't watched or listened to episode 11, the raw footage from it is on our YouTube channel. Go to Apple, Spotify, whatever your podcast channel is or host is. Download episode 11. So Theran, that's titled The Silent Professional. Theran was the guest and the star of that show. As a former Green Beret, so you corrected me last time.
Yeah, right. Always.
As a Green Beret, when you were in the military, now transitioned, you are a police officer with Anchorage Police Department.
Correct.
And you're detailed to the SWAT team.
Yep,
So
correct.
you're pretty well integrated into the police department.
Yeah, it's been over 6 years, so.
Yeah.
Yep.
In Anchorage, in Alaska, we're pretty well insulated from a fair amount of the nonsense that's happening in the lower 48.
We are.
We have had some protests. They've been peaceful.
Yep.
Part of that has to do with being an armed community.
I agree.
An armed community is a polite community.
Yep.
You don't get out of control very quick for very long. So what's on the day to day? What's the discussion, or what's the sentiment around this with your brothers and sisters in the police department?
So I'll be honest, I haven't been at work for a little while because of my arm surgery.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like you said, Alaska is different than any other state in the lower 48. Anchorage we're fortunate up here. And I say people up here are smarter, maybe. I don't know. I think people here have a better view of both sides, mm-hmm. and are more able to do what they want, do their protests in a reasonable manner.
Mm-hmm.
They had the protests up here, and the police department kind of flipped out and got prepared for the worst, and
right.
Seeing everything that's going down in the lower 48, and so the police department prepared for it. And pleasantly surprised, it was peaceful, and we have a good relationship with citizens, and citizens have a good relationship with us, for the most part. So
yeah,
it was amicable, and people should protest. They should peacefully protest. That's America. That's what we have the right to do.
We protected that right, and that's something I tell people. That is one thing that I have still engaged with people online, as I've kind of been silent the last month or so. And it kills me when it's military, when our brothers, right? It's like, well, they shouldn't be doing this, whatever, but they don't have the right to do that. They do, actually. And it was our service that protected it.
Now, whether we like it or not.
Right. Yeah. I don't have to agree with it.
They've got the right to say whatever they want.
Right. Now what they don't have the right to do is burn property.
Yeah.
To destroy. Yeah, that is, you have a right to peacefully assemble.
Yep.
But when your right to peacefully assemble infringes on another citizen's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, mm-hmm. or their protection and perseverance of their property, what they've worked hard for, a business, their home, then that's no longer peaceful assembly, and that's not protected.
Next step.
And that's difficult for some of our comrades to grasp, is, our service protected and preserved their right to do that. Just yesterday, there were, because of the lady at Fort Hood, the female soldier at Fort Hood that mm-hmm. was allegedly murdered by her squad leader, team leader, whatever, and then that coward shot himself as the police were trying to apprehend him. There was 4 or 5 ladies, female soldiers, standing out on Muldoon in front of Olive Garden at Cotonou, with signs. And we went into Olive Garden for lunch, and I actually parked, and I was like, hold on a second. And I walked up and I thanked them. I was like, thank you. Because they had signs, if Sharp was working, this wouldn't have happened. This wouldn't have happened. So it is important to get a message out. And I think that it's exciting to a certain degree, because we're witnessing history.
Oh yeah.
Right now,
things will not be the same.
Yeah, our country will not be the same whenever this shakes out. This isn't going to shake out next month. It's not going to shake out in 2020.
Nope.
But I think it on a certain degree, it's exciting, but it's fearful.
Oh yeah.
When you look at CHOP, when you look at the fact that they have burned half of, or a part of Minneapolis, a fair part of Minneapolis, yep. Just yesterday, unfortunately, it was in Texas. I can't remember off the top of my head. 2 Texas police officers were shot in the line of duty and ambushed yesterday.
Yeah, simply because of the job that they chose to perform every day.
Right. And so it's becoming very escalated very quick. In the article that I read, I actually read it when we were at Russ's yesterday, and I was going to show it to him like, nah, I'm not going to ruin the moment. We're here, 7-year-old birthday party, getting together with friends for the first time. We haven't been together as a group for a while, and I was like, yeah, not
Save
right
that
now.
For later, yep.
Yeah. But the report, they were intentionally called to be ambushed, is what the speculation is. In that thought, when you look at the growing calls to defund police, New York City has voted to defund the police.
Yeah.
Minneapolis has voted to do it. There's calls all in major metropolitan areas all across the United States to defund the police department. What's that look like when that's done?
So part of me, and I think I've mentioned it before, part of me wants to, two sides of my thought process. Mm-hmm. Part of me as a patriot and a father and like, defund the police, get rid of the police department. If this is what people are asking for, let's do it and see what the result is. Because like I said before, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
My wife knows how to shoot. I know how to shoot. My kids know how to shoot.
Right.
So we'll be okay. We don't need to call the police.
Right.
Then the other part of me is seeing the citizens that do support the police. And there's a huge population that do support the police. And I have seen them call themselves a silent majority. Mm-hmm. Well, problem is they're still silent. They need to step up and say
stop
something.
Being silent.
And stop being silent and say, no, we're not going to defund the police. Police officers are essential workers in the United States. When somebody breaks into your house, when somebody steals your car, when somebody hits you on the side of the road or assaults you in the store, or anything, who do you call? You call the police. When your 90-year-old grandmother dies in her bed of natural causes, who do you think is the first people to show up? Police. Right. When the police are defunded and your 90-year-old grandma dies in her bed, what are you going to do? Who are you going to call? Like it. So
some of the negative impacts, and we talked about this in pre-show, in Minneapolis, the kind of the epicenter and boiling point of all this that's happening. I'll let that go away. I didn't mean to hit it. 3 of the city council members who voted to defund the police, this was reported 2 or 3 weeks ago, because of the silent majority, in some of them stopped being silent, but they started going about things the wrong way.
Yeah, it's all about tact.
Tact and execution. They started lodging death threats against the city council members who initiated this action and this call to action. So,
not the smartest thing to do.
No. So the end result of this is these 3 city council members have had to hire private security because they are in fear of their life, and I would understand that. At a cost of $10,000 to $12,000 a week to the taxpayer. I mean, how backwards is that?
Defund the police, get rid of the police department, and make it all private security.
But I get private security.
Yeah.
They've talked about different community policing things, different community policing initiatives, and one of the biggest things that I've heard of, which I'll elaborate and give more color on it, that concerns me is for certain types of calls, they would have specially trained social workers respond. Mm-hmm. Well, my wife works in the social work space. My wife's a case manager. And as a husband, that's not what her job is.
No.
To show up and potentially resolve a domestic, even if they gave her training, that's a police officer's job. Now, heaven forbid that ever happened up here, because if somebody with, some nefarious fucker tried to do something, my wife was a soldier, it probably wouldn't work out well for them.
She'll be all right.
She'll be all right.
Yeah.
But again, we are, we're a family that shoots. We're a family that trains. We're a family that's served. And, but again, we're part of the 1% to 2% of our country that's actually done that.
Yeah.
So I think of that scenario of one of my wife's many coworkers that she's had in the various roles that she's had in the social work space. I mean, those people are so vulnerable. They would never survive anything.
No. And with the calls that officers go to, it's a split. You get the regular calls where it's a traffic collision or you're dealing with quote unquote normal people. And then a majority of the calls are people in a altered mental state, whether it be drugs, alcohol, mental issues that they're going through, and they need intervention.
Right.
And people in those states aren't thinking clearly. So when they're told, sit down, calm down, like that doesn't happen. They're not going to sit down and calm down because you ask them to.
Right.
So you got to have a social worker who's willing to go hands-on and subdue somebody. If I was a social worker, I'd say, no, not my job. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
Like, not worth the risk. As a cop, part of me says, no, that's not my job. When we deal with people who are committing crimes under the influence of drugs and deemed unable to mentally cope themselves, and they throw cases out, it's probably not worth my job as a cop to go hands-on and deal with that and get spit on and kicked when they're not going to press charges. They're not going to push through with anything. They'll be out tomorrow. So as a social worker, I'd say, nope. Yeah, this person's in distress. They're getting angry or they're getting physical. Who do I call?
Right.
You call the police anyway.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes up routinely, and this has been something that we've had discussion with one of my younger children. There's a meme that keeps going around. There's a lot of discussion that keeps going around about, a cop goes through 6 months at the police academy and the amount of, power that they wield after only 6 months of training. And one of the things from my very limited experience supporting law enforcement as a team medic for SWAT teams and SRT but what I've tried to explain to people is it's not just 6 months in the academy. You don't graduate the academy and get a car and a baton and a gun and get to go play Wyatt Earp.
Yeah.
You're with a field training officer. You're in an FTO status for how long is that?
Up here, it's 6 months or 5 months, I think.
Okay.
With 5 different officers and like it's a process.
Right. So by the time in what I've tried to explain to my child about it is it's like a doctor. They go through internship and residency. They're just not out killing people right away.
Constantly training.
Most doctors don't kill people. Right. They're training along the way. It's supplemental. So they took the and what frustrates me about that analogy is it's so false that you take one aspect of it and you're focusing on that, and it's not true. It's you're getting about half of the training and education that they actually get. There's the clinical. I'm a healthcare guy. There's the clinical side of it that is critical to understanding and learning and executing and what your roles are. So you're claiming that somebody only has 6 months of training and education when the reality is they're about a year. And Anchorage Police Department, like most police departments, there's a college education requirement, or at least recommended before incentives before you come to the academy. So it's fair to say that, this analogy, I think it's fair to say, and I'm asking for clarification, this false analogy claims that these untrained, uneducated people only have 6 months of training before they're out in the world wielding power. And the reality is most of them have at least 1 to 2 years of college before they go to the police academy, their time at the police academy, plus their field training officer time. So you've got people that actually have 3 to 4 years of education and training before they're on the ground.
Yep. And you've got to be 21 to be an officer anyway. You have to be 21 to carry a gun. So you've graduated high school at 18 and you've done something for the last 3 years, probably college, but worked something.
A lot of them military.
A lot of military. You're not just somebody.
Yeah, Xboxing it.
That goes back to the argument of defunding the police, and they want to take money from the police departments, but they want more training for police officers. So a lot of those people can't tell you what training police officers get in the first place.
Right.
But they want more training for police officers. They want more training, but they want to take the money away. So somebody's got the training costs money.
Right.
You can't have all the officers off the street training when, I mean, it's a split.
Right.
So things cost money. And you get the argument from people saying 6 months of training to be a cop or 800 months or whatever it is for the barber, to be a barber, whatever
Right.
the hell it was.
1,500 hours. Yeah.
Whatever. And in my thought, you get paid as a cop way better than a barber.
Right.
So if it were that easy to be a cop, as opposed to as difficult as it is to be a barber, and a cop, at least up here, gets paid quite a bit more than a barber.
Right.
You thought would say, well, fuck, why isn't everybody a barber? Or why isn't everybody a cop? Why would I go through 8,000 hours of being a barber to get paid half
Nothing.
of what I get paid as a cop?
Right.
And you get people saying, well, defund the police. They need to change. We need change. Become a cop. If you want change, be the change.
Right.
Do it. And more times than not, people go, no, I'll never be a cop. I'm not going to do that. Why not?
Right.
Well, no, because I don't want to. I'm not going to do
Well,
that. I'm not
my
gonna be part
answer
of
to that question is I'm just too fucking old, or Lord
Well-
knows I would.
Well, and after 6 years of being a cop, like,
Yeah.
look what we're dealing with.
Right.
Half the country doesn't want police at all, and you get no support, and officers getting ambushed just because of the job they perform.
Right.
Why would anybody want to be a cop?
Yeah. So it's funny you say that. Just I was in a conversation with someone at work about a month ago, and we were that was the sentiment of the conversation. Remember growing up when you would play games, cops and robbers. You would want to be a police officer. You dreamt that, being a police officer was something a lot of kids dreamed about. And that was a goal of theirs. And police officers were revered. They were inspiring, just like being the president. Yep. Teachers used to, if
you can grow up to be the president.
You could grow up to be the president of the United States one day. Why the fuck would you threaten a kid with that now?
Yep. Yeah.
Hey, Johnny.
They don't want cops in schools anymore. Schools say, no, we don't want police officers here because it's bad.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, like everything in society, you get the 1%, that you get the exception that makes the rule. Like, I think school resource officers and their efficacy was completely deflated at Parkland. You had school resource officers there, an active shooting, and they did nothing. They allowed people to die. Try that shit up here. Probably wouldn't end the same way.
It's not going to happen.
Right. On the topic of school resource officers, my children, some of their best, most exciting experiences in school, and some of the best relationships that they've had in junior high and high school were with the resource officers.
Yep.
They were present.
The ones here are great.
Yes. They were present. They knew, my son, his junior year, if you remember when he goofing off before school and they went out by Beach Lake and flew off the road down a 20-foot embankment and got in a wreck. And the resource officer was one of the officers that responded. He was the closest officer.
Yeah.
So, we go out there as the parents to meet him. We're scared to death. Our son flew off a 20-foot embankment, and the resource officer's out there. And our schools aren't as big as some of the schools in the lower 48, and I get that. But our schools also only have one resource officer versus there's multiple at other schools in the bigger schools. And I don't know if they have a quota or an equation that defines how many resource officers per student.
One resource officer for 4 schools.
Right.
Up here. So.
Right. But this gentleman knew my son.
Mm-hmm. Had the rapport and the relationship.
He had the rapport, and he could tell me, hey, look, because he pulled me aside. He's like, hey, look, your son's a good kid. I'm not worried about him. But there's a couple kids in this car that were riffraff that, you should have a talk with your son about who he hangs out with. But he knew him. he knew who the good apples were and who the bad apples were. And again, in when we lived up in Fairbanks and North Pole, the resource officer up there had a relationship with the children, and not just my children, everybody. Because this is military communities. It's not like we stand out. We're just part of the flow here. Nobody's special. But they have an impact, and you take that away. And when we're talking about community policing relationships, if you take that one relationship out of the equation that could be a positive relationship,
you're influencing young kids as they come into adulthood.
Right.
You're making good contacts with police.
Right.
Where kids realize that the police aren't just there to hem you up and
write
your tickets, but they're there to talk to you if you need help or if something's happening.
Right.
Like, officers don't become school resource officers because they don't want to help kids. Like, that's the sole purpose of why they choose that part of their career. Police, I can tell with certainty, almost 100% certainty, police officers don't become police officers because they want to do corrupt shit and they think it's a good opportunity to make money and ruin lives.
Right.
Most cops become cops because they want to make a difference. They want to help the community.
Right. It's freaky. This is why we're going to do more shows together, because you're in my head. I was just thinking how to segue. Let's be objective and let's play devil's advocate. Because this is, again, the 1%, what I believe is probably the 1% to 2% that is the exception that is becoming the rule. It's that false balance. There are corrupt police officers. There are people who, although they might not have gotten in to the career field for the specific purpose of abusing power and wielding power and control over people, something happened along the way.
Yep. It's a learned behavior.
Right. Something happened along the way that they are in a position of power and
have gone the wrong way.
And they've gone the wrong way. Just in everything that I've seen and read, that officer in Minneapolis, he murdered that dude. I don't know the full backstory. I know what everybody else has access to, right? But from what I've seen and from what I've read, especially the fact that I think he had 18 other complaints for abuse of force.
Yeah, that's a clue.
Right. And that's a right. And that's a liability on the Minneapolis Police Department for either employing him after he left another department or two for this, and then continuing to employ him.
Allowing it to continue without proper training or repercussions for what he was doing.
Right. And unfortunately, that adds weight to the argument of the other side.
Yeah.
Because now, you've got a major metropolitan police force, and is it so big that it just got
bypassed? They missed it, or
right? That I wouldn't want to think that they intentionally just said, "Yeah, we recognize he's a problem, and we're just not going to do anything about it." Is it, and I think the larger the department, the larger the metropolitan service area is, you have larger problems because. The larger the organization, things get missed because your lens is so broad and macro that you can't look at the micro problems. But yeah, so there are corrupt cops. From being on the inside for 6 years, in not specifically about Anchorage, but it is this 1%, 2%. Because people are in America calling it a systemic problem.
Which is, so I can speak for Anchorage. And I'll say, my opinion, or what I say is my own opinion. It doesn't reflect for who I work for or anything else. It's all my own opinions. But I'm proud to work for the department I work for in Anchorage. And I couldn't put a percentage on corrupt cops because I don't think there are any up here. Mm-hmm. There are cops that like writing tickets. There are cops that are going to hem you up for going 2 miles an hour over. That's their thing.
That doesn't make them corrupt.
Doesn't make them corrupt. In 6 years of being a police officer in Anchorage, I have never seen one corrupt cop. For one, the department wouldn't let it happen.
Right.
It's not worth it for the police department to allow that to happen, to get the repercussions from the citizens and
look
the
at
city,
Look at Atlanta, Chicago, Minneapolis.
The trust that we have with the citizens is the most important thing that we've got.
Right.
I mean, it's like your word. Your word means more than anything.
Right.
The relationship we have and the trust we have with the citizens of Anchorage is the most important thing. And the department's not going to let one cop ruin that relationship. And
which is comforting being a resident up here. And again, we talked about, 20 minutes ago, whatever, we're insulated from a lot of the...
We are. Very
just
much
the
so.
Shenanigans that happen in the lower 48. And one of the things that I try to talk to people about, and I don't want to get on a rabbit hole and make sure I come back, is when Ferguson was going on, in 14, I did some research and I can't remember the scope that I put it on. It was cities with a population of greater than 100,000, whatever. There was on average 2.5 to 3 million police contacts per day.
Yeah.
Okay. Per day, times 365. How many police contacts happen every day in the United States in a medium-sized or larger community? Yeah. And then how many of them actually go bad?
Yeah. How many end in a shooting or some corrupt action?
Right.
Not many.
So Anchorage is, we're kind of insulated from it in that small town feel, that small town mentality of,
people care about their neighbors for the most part.
Right.
And it's...
And I really appreciated hearing you talk about, the department wouldn't tolerate the sacrificing of the community relationship and support for one guy or one girl for one bad officer. But that's not the case in other places. And we talked about it's probably because they're so large. As soldiers, let's not just bitch about the problem. What are some of the solutions? Obviously, I don't think defunding, and I agree with you. If they've defund police across the United States, if there was sweeping legislation to defund the police, again, repeatedly, we're insulated from it up here.
Yeah.
B, if that became a national, federal thing, whatever, my family will be okay.
Yeah.
I'm not worried necessarily about my family. But I can't remember the name of it, and I should have done a bit more research before the show, but there's an effect, there's a political effect where if you get, if you want a law to change at the federal level, if it takes 9 to 15 states to enact a local law at the state level before it gets gratis, before it gets the weight that it needs to push at the federal level.
Yeah.
And a lot of those statistics were around sweeping gun control regulation. It's not going to happen at the federal level. They're not just going to, repeal the Second Amendment. They're not just, but if enough states, and it was specifically around red flag laws, if enough states start enacting red flag laws, then it has the momentum.
Yep. Yeah. It becomes a big thing
to potentially pass at the federal level. So with police reform, and that's what people should be talking about, not defunding police. If there's, in healthcare, we have something called a never event. Okay. And that's, a wrong site surgery, someone's supposed to come in for, we both had ulnar nerve surgeries.
And you get a leg amputation or something.
Right. Well, if I needed my left ulnar nerve, transposed and moved, and they did my right.
Yeah.
Right. These types of things are never events. So the misadministration of a drug that could have a catastrophic and terminal effect on a patient. So I would think that a shooting or the killing of somebody who, whether they were guilty of a crime or not, but, that they didn't deserve to die, that something just escalated out of control for the law enforcement community, that would be a never event. Those types of things should never happen.
Right.
And in healthcare, never events are, we measure that on the number of incidences per 10,000 patient contacts, right? And so it kind of gives you a scale or percentage of incident rate. And I think, again, 2.5 to 3 million police contacts per day. You hear about maybe 10 incidences a year.
Yep.
Right.
Pretty good numbers.
Pretty good numbers, but they should never happen. So how do we get this in this is just for conversation piece. This is something that the healthcare community, we still struggle with.
Yeah.
Because although we recognize these are the type of things that should never happen, they happen from time to time. It shouldn't happen. Nobody intentionally wants it to happen. For a multitude of reasons, it comes up from time to time, and we try to keep that number as low as possible.
Yep.
How does the law enforcement community work on their never events to keep those numbers? Admittedly, they're getting blown out of proportion right now, but you, unfortunately, again, with social media and everyone's got a camera phone, it becomes viral within 30 minutes. How do we control that? How do we not control the sharing of information, but how do we control
the never events?
The never events.
I don't know. I think there will always be never events like that in the police department. As a police officer, the reason police are called is because shit went south.
Right.
Because people can't adult themselves. So the police are called.
Right.
So people are, like I said, people are already in an altered state of mind. They're either drunk or on drugs or having one of the worst days of their life. So you're already at a disadvantage. I don't know how you go to England and take cops' guns away, and then you're not going to have any more police shootings.
Yeah, but then
you're going to have
stabbings.
a lot more other deaths. Yeah.
But the people get murdered on the street by hammer.
Yep.
I mean, that's a thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They
So
get
I don't know.
Yeah, and the fact that you don't have an answer is not a big because in healthcare, again, we struggle with it.
And I think the difference in healthcare is, and police, a lot of our never occurrences are by the choice of the citizen we're dealing with at the time.
Right.
They, like, cops don't just go out and kill people willy-nilly. They don't just pull their guns out and shoot random people for nothing.
Right.
No matter how many officer-involved shootings there are across the country, 99% of them are probably not just an officer walking out and smoking some dude for no reason.
Capping them. Well, and that's, so if you, even going back to Ferguson, and people, and that was, for me, one of the most frustrating things was in the scope of a week, nobody was talking about the fact that this guy, Michael, whatever his name is, because it's not worth remembering his name, honestly. Yep. He was committing a crime. To your point,
people forget that.
Police were not just walking by going, I'm going to fuck that dude up right now.
No.
That officer was called because there was the active commission of a crime happening. And so the major ones that come to mind over the last 5 years or so, the majority of them that I can recall, they were historically a criminal. They had a criminal past. The majority of them were felons. A couple of them, not all of them, were felons. And they were in the commission of a crime when the law enforcement responded to them, and B, they were not complying. Yeah.
And we say all the time to people, they're driving their own train. You're in the commission of a crime. You're being given a lawful order to stop or put a gun down or put the knife down or whatever it is. They're driving their own train.
Right.
If they choose to comply, they get taken into custody and they go through the legal processes and everyone's safe. It's the people who don't choose to comply and take their path, the other route, that it's them driving their own train. They make the decisions that they're making.
Now, last week I spent some time in the evening doing some research, and I was able to find video that there were, I was able to find 4, and I don't remember names, cities, but I found 4 that really hung in my head. And again, you know me, better than most nowadays. Very huge advocate and supporter of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Loved my time on SWAT. If you to hear me talk, you'd think I was on SWAT longer than I was. Very short time in my life. But there were 4, even as biased as I might be towards law enforcement, there were 4 specific situations where I watched this and I was actually drawn back, and I was like, that should never have happened. And whoever it was, whoever the officers were, they were either out of control, undisciplined, and people were either injured or killed.
Yeah.
That were doing they got pulled over for a traffic stop, and they were profiled, or the one specifically, and I think it was in Texas, and it wasn't this year or last year. It might have gone back as to 17 or 18. They were the individual contacted was fairly well compliant. At a certain point in time when their rights were clearly violated,
yep.
They stopped. I would have too. I would have become at a certain point in time when you're being personally attacked, whether the person's in uniform or not. When they show a lack of professionalism, a lack of training, and a lack of respect, and you know that you're being attacked, that uniform stops being visible. And it's just a person on a person.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying to comply or you're being fairly compliant and they just are abusing whatever. But a lot of research for specific incidences from 2016 to now. And of course that doesn't capture everything. And I know that there's a ton of unknowns. But again, it's difficult to find something nowadays. I would say in the last 24 months, I see people, and I know people, and if you're one of the people that I know that listen to my show or my Facebook, whatever part of my network, and you're one of those people that has a dash cam that you've installed over the last 24 months to have that eye back on the police, I got nothing for you. I don't know what to say about it. Good on you. Yeah. Okay. But
I don't, I mean, if you want a video or record, cool. We do too.
Right.
So right. Like, I know I've always said, if the argument for body cameras and in-car cameras and everything else, if you're doing the right thing to begin with, the camera is just a second. It's just there.
Right.
You're still doing the right thing. But,
well, in more suspected abusive force cases have been thrown out since the body camera thing,
yep.
Because the audio video body cam recording is prevalent in every major metropolitan.
You wouldn't believe, and it happens here, but it's got to be exponential in large cities. How many accusations are made against the police that are debunked by a recorder or an in-car camera?
Right.
So citizens recording it and like, okay, cool. You can record all you want.
Yeah.
Doesn't bother me. But when it becomes an issue, it interferes with the contact we're having, then it distracts from why I'm here, why I'm talking to you. You're not hearing me.
Right.
You're not listening to what I'm asking you to do or talking to you about. You're more focused on a camera.
Yeah, and that's something that I've noticed when I was doing some research and looking at people's personal videos.
A lot of people record because they know they're recording.
It's a good sound.
Yeah, it was. Picked it up good.
It's good coffee. I mean, you'd think these people are paid actors.
Yeah, they want something to happen with their camera.
They do.
Because they're recording.
And it's like, don't know what I was doing, just got pulled over, made sure my dash cam's on, blah, blah, blah. I'm on this, they give the time of day. They're prepping the video for evidence in court.
Yeah. They want something to happen.
They have an agenda going into it. And when you watch enough of these, how could you think that they don't have an agenda? When I get pulled over,
there's full YouTube videos or YouTube channels of people doing just that.
Yeah.
Just getting in contact with the police and recording it.
Now,
trying to get stuff to happen.
I watched this one guy and admitted I had a complete 180-degree flip of emotion because in a certain part, at the very beginning of it, it was funny. And then at the end of it, as a supporter of law enforcement, I was getting mad. But this guy, he made a video of talking to the police the way police talk to citizens. Okay. And so he went to a police department.
Funny.
It sounds funny.
Starting off, yeah.
Right. He goes to this police department and there's a detective that's walking through the parking lot. Hey, what are you doing today? Can I help you? No. Can I help you? What are you doing here? What's your business here? Why are you here? You got an agenda? And so he just goes through and a lot of the line of questioning and the brashness of it. And it's a lot of the lines are what you'd hear in dumb Hollywood movies,
yeah.
Right? And it's like, have you been drinking today? And so this other, it immediately this detective gets defensive. He's like, I'm going to have you arrested. He's like, well, actually you can't have me arrested. This is public property and I have the right to film here. And then immediately, the cop the detective backs off from the threat of arrest. And then another police officer walks by, a uniformed guy, and he's like, hey, what do you know this guy? Has he been known to drink on the job? Blah, 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 blah. And it went from being comedic for a couple of minutes to, look, you're inciting a situation here that...
Just sad.
It is sad. And at the end of the day, I had to applaud the detective for walking away.
Yep.
He walked away pissed off. But here's the thing. And this is what people don't understand or might not think about. What if that detective was working on a child abduction case?
Oh, yeah.
It's going to take him hours to be able to focus on what he was doing to try to solve a case. He's a fucking detective. And you intentionally irritated him and incited him. He's not focused on caseload. He's not focused on whatever he was going into work on. Now he's got to be de-escalated. He's probably in it talking to all the other detectives or going down the hall to talk to the uniform
tell the story
guy
8 times to 8 other officers. And
right. If he's potentially smart, might have called internal affairs and just said, hey, look, if they have an IA bureau or whatever, hey, look, I just got accosted by some dude and a camera out in the parking lot in case you hear something.
Yeah, I probably made YouTube.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Notify their PAO about, hey, I'm probably going to be on YouTube. Yeah. This just happened. And he's not doing his job.
I think what people need to remember, like being a cop it's a job.
Right.
And it's a little more in depth than a lot of our other jobs, but every cop on the job wants to go do their 8 hours or 10 hours at work, and they want to go home and see their family and get out of the uniform and get out of the boots and be home. It's a job.
Yeah.
And it's a thankless job, and not a lot of people want to do it, but remembering that everybody else, we're just people too. And stuff like that does not help.
No.
Doing your job. That's like going to the grocery store and screaming at the cashier for 10 minutes because she gave you 20 cents less or she counted your change wrong. Like people do it, but you shouldn't. They're just trying to do their job.
Yeah, and again, we talked about it a little while ago that, I remember growing up, I'd fantasize about being a police officer. I thought it would be great.
It probably was when police were respected.
They were respected.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's sad because it's not so much. And I think of people that I know in the law enforcement community that get out. We have this same dynamic in the military. You have good soldiers or good police officers that because of challenges and problems with the military or challenges and problems, nobody respects soldiers anymore.
No.
Even when not that anybody should say thank you for your service, but the yellow ribbon kindness and it's lip service for the most part. You've got recruiters that can't even go on college campuses to recruit now. I mean, when did that become a thing, right? And then, so serving your country in the military, it
doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything anymore.
It doesn't mean anything with the exception of people who are doing it.
Right.
The people who are still doing it, it means something to them. Everybody else, it doesn't seem to make a difference. And
I've repeatedly on this show drawn correlation between the brotherhood of soldiers and the brotherhood and first responders and police officers. And in my assessment or my assumption is that when you guys are on the job, it's about the service to the community to a certain degree, but especially in today's very violent anti-police society, it becomes about you and the guy and girl to your left and right.
And just trying to go home at the end of the day.
And just getting through the shift.
Yep. Which changes the dynamics of police work in general across the country. Every officer through this last month or 2 months of stuff going on in the country, I guarantee every officer who went to work on shift was just focused on going home at the end of the day.
Right.
So they're doing probably less traffic stops, less contacts with citizens, less. You immediately go into a domestic violence disagreement with a different mindset, trying to get out of there as quick as you can because you don't want to escalate it and risk not going home. So I guarantee it's changed the entire dynamics of police work and police officers across the country, just knowing that there's no support and that.
Well, and if somebody, so as an operations director in my full-time career, somebody who, this isn't a knock on folks at all, but if I have an employee whose only motivation is clocking out,
not going to get a whole lot done.
They're not very effective.
No.
Their attention to detail is not there because they're distracted because they're just trying to get through the shift. And I think it's a fair comparison to make because in healthcare, I have highly technically trained people that are making their jobs impact human life. Police work, highly technically.
The shift from wanting to show up for patrol and make a difference and contact businesses and community members and show a difference and help out shifts from that, which should be as a police officer. That's why you join the police forces, to make a difference in your community and support people in the community and make it a safer place. Shifts from that to, people are killing officers for no reason.
Right.
People are inciting fights with cops for no reason. Man, I'm going to come to work and the only thing I'm focused on is being safe and going home.
Right.
Because that's my goal, is to survive. Like, you don't want to die.
Right.
So your your focus automatically shifts from doing good police work and making a difference in the community to not focusing a whole lot on police work and just focusing on your own survival.
Right.
And getting home.
Yeah. So the current climate, the current political stigma around police officers, law enforcement community is actually making potentially a less effective police force.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think it's probably across the country that way.
Right.
People who are eligible for retirement in departments across the country are waiting for their 20 to retire as soon as they can.
Right.
I used to, 6 years ago or 4 years ago, whatever, when 2 years into being a cop, I used to tell people, hey, APD pays well. It's a good company to work for. You make a difference. Totally recommend it.
Right.
Now that hasn't changed 6 years later. The department's still a great department. The city's still awesome, but being a cop in general is not a job I would suggest anybody to take up. It's not worth the risk and the stress and the things that police officers deal with. I think is overlooked a lot by citizens.
Sure.
In shootings, in deaths, in all of the shittiest, sexual assault, child sexual assault, the shittiest things you can think of in the world that happen, it's officers that show up first.
Right.
When a guy's been shot 5 times, it's not the medics that show up first because police has to secure the scene.
Oh yeah, trust me. We're trained. Question number 1 on your is the scene secure?
Yeah. So people forget that officers are seeing the worst.
Yep.
Every single day. Car collisions where kids are ejected from cars and in pieces. Shit that no human being should have to witness.
Yeah.
These police officers are the first ones on scene. And Like, okay, so what are you going to do without police? Who is going to show up to that car collision with kids ejected and dead bodies all over? Social worker?
Right.
I mean, I don't know, but I think a lot of people forget what the main job that police officers do is. People focus on writing tickets or enforcing the guy walking down the street at 2 a.m., checking door handles on businesses.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot more that happens
on
a day-to-day.
And I think, and we'll start to wrap up, but I think CHOP is a good petri dish of understanding my closing statement that I'll make in just a moment. Because, people have been killed in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Mm-hmm. In CHOP, whatever they're calling it down there now, because first responders can't get in. And I remember as a street medic in East St. Louis, active gang shooting, and we're called to the scene. There's 2 people with gunshot wounds that are down, and we roll up to the train tracks, getting ready to go into East St. Louis, and police officers are sitting there, and they're kind of my escort.
Yeah.
Right. And so we pull over with them, and they're like, yeah, we're not going in yet because
it's not worth
it. Yeah. And this was back in 94, 95.
Yeah.
This is a long time ago. And yeah, they're just hang out, and then we could hear the gunshots, and the tenor and tone of the fire goes down, and then they go in, and then they call us forward.
Yeah.
So if you defund the police, and that's what I think, that's been my biggest counter argument is I don't think you totally understand what you're asking for.
Oh yeah.
In my closing thought, and people have to open their mind and try to be objective. What they really need, and this, we might have to go into a second show. What the call to action should be is not defund the police, but is better fund the police.
I agree.
The police need more resources. They need more training. They need more support. And that's hard for people to be able to understand or wrap their head around that. With better training, with better support, with better resources, with better everything. And I think Anchorage is a good example of it. Again, there's good community support. Officers are paid well.
Yep.
You guys appear to be fairly well resourced. We don't have the problems.
Right. Yeah, I think, and it still goes back to the military where I think where they adjust training for, if they lower the standards because that's who's coming in. They need 20 guys, but they can't meet the standards, so they'll lower the standard.
Right.
That's something that hasn't been done up here. That the standard has not changed. It's still a strict standard to the point where the department's having trouble finding people who want to do the job or willing to do the job. So that dwindles it down to 20. And then you got difficulty getting those 20 people to pass because they may not pass a background check, or they may have a crime on their record, or they have used drugs that doesn't meet the criteria. It dwindles it back down to 10 or 5. So keeping the same standards for hiring is important, and not adjusting the standards for who's applying.
Right.
But like anything in this country, you can't do anything without money. You got to have funding.
Right.
And when you take the money away, you're probably not going to find a whole lot of people that want to do it anyway.
Sure.
So problem solved. Defund the police. No more police, because nobody's going to want to do it. I would implore, side note, that anybody curious, take a ride along. Every department in the country, I think, offers ride-alongs for citizens. It's your right as a citizen to see what police officers are doing and how your department.
It's your tax money. You're paying for it.
Yeah. So I think every department in the country offers ride-alongs for their citizens. We do in Anchorage. If
Right.
you want to see what the police department is doing and what a day-to-day, what the tasks are for the police, take a ride-along. Sign on, fill out the form, and do a ride-along. And I think it'd probably change a lot of people's minds across the country.
Yeah, my mind's working right now. I'm like, oh, we're going to video right along. I'm going to figure this one out. I think that's a great closing, actually. As I talked, as I opened the show up about, being quiet for 4 to 6 weeks and trying to open my mind up and where, some of the political challenges that are going on in our country right now, I've had to rethink. And I've actually, I maybe not done a 180-degree change, but some of them I've had a 90-degree change.
You got to see it from both angles.
Right.
You got to look at both sides.
And I think we are in a very exciting time in our country that history is being written right now.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want to create another hour-and-a-half show about the rewriting of history. That's a different episode altogether. I wanted to focus on the important topic of, policing our nation, in our communities, more importantly. And I think that is a great call to action. If you think that...
If you think an injustice is being made, see for yourself.
Right.
Spend a day on a shift with a police officer and see what you think.
There you go. So that's where we're closing it out for this week. If you want to understand the law enforcement community a little bit better, if you want to understand how and why and when and what it looks like to ride along with your local police department, sign up for a ride along. Understand a little bit more before we start making drastic recommendations. And if you're a city council member, if you're somebody who holds an elected office, I would implore you to make sure you do this before you start passing legislation, or sanction policies. And then before you do it, know what the alternative solution is. I think New York just voted to defund the NYPD, and they don't have a solution.
No plan. Yep.
There's no plan. Just fuck it. We're doing it.
See what happens.
And if you're curious what that looks like, you can go back. I would ask you to look up U.S. Marshal Wyatt Earp and the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. That's a good example of the shit that you're going to find when you get rid of law enforcement altogether, or you have one or two people with that power and then everyone else who's trying to do good in the community piecing it together.
Yep.
Tombstone's a fun place, actually. I like it down there. So, Theran, thanks for coming and hanging out again. This will probably not be the last time you see him.
Nope, I will be back.
Yeah. This was intentionally kind of just a free-for-all show because America's kind of all over the place. I wanted to focus on one specific issue today, and we'll start grabbing more issues and diving into them. So thanks for the conversation. Yep. I really appreciate it. Stay tuned. We've got the Swatara coffee review. Before we do close, this was, I want your opinion. This was Swatara coffee out of Pennsylvania. This was the Guatemala Antigua. Woohoo! Got it on camera. How's the coffee?
It is nice.
Yeah.
Just black, no cream or nothing.
Just a full-bodied flavor. It's not bitter.
Not overpowering, but good flavor. It
drinks well, but it's got a very strong coffee flavor to it. So this was the second batch that Swatara had sent to me. They are a veteran-owned company out of Pennsylvania. Great product. They're eco-friendly. Their packaging, if you remember from the show 6 weeks ago, my little eco-warrior daughter was just all raving about how eco-friendly their packaging was. So check them out, swataracoffee.com. Really good stuff. Another support, I recommend support to other veteran organizations. So stay tuned. I'll close the show out in just a little bit. Stop. And we'll go good on that.
I gotta go take a pee again.
Yeah. I got that on.
That's right. Yeah, close with that.